Today we're going to talk about how to keep that cold air out and that warm air inside. We just got that high efficiency furnace put in. We don't want all that warm air to go to waste. So I'm going to talk about all those things you might need to know about your thermal envelope. And I've got a riddle for you, so stay tuned. Welcome to the Rundown Reborn channel. So the thermal envelope. What is that exactly? Well, it's basically your ultimate line of defense, or your skin, that's going to keep all that nasty weather outside from getting in. Your main enemy is air. Air infiltration. It's not so much about heat getting in, it's about that cold air getting in. For the past few months, or really ever since I bought this place, had this giant hole in the back of the house. The window was broken out originally. This summer, I took that out and tried to get this cleaned up a little bit. So I had a sheet of plywood just kind of tacked over it, and I wanted to get something a little bit better to keep the hot air out. It did okay, but it was still getting in. It was awful hot up here this summer. Now this winter, I got the other battle to fight. I got all this cold air coming. Today is a really nice day for December, so I'm going to take advantage of that and try to get this window in. So I just finally got my windows here. It took almost 2 months for these guys to arrive. COVID. On top of that, the day I'm picking those things up, I picked up the other vanity we ordered a while back. They didn't have it in stock, so we waited for that one too. Finally arrived, loading that on the truck, man. I wrenched it. I wrenched the back. So I've been down for like a week and a half. Finally feeling better, back to about 95, 96%, maybe 96.5. Ready to get back at it, man. I'm getting stir crazy. Now, if that weren't enough, they closed the schools. So you're looking at an elementary teacher right now. So all things considered, work's a little slower these days. But we're in the holidays here. I just ain't gonna get much done. I've just come to terms with that. So we're gonna have to move on as quick as we can and do what we can. But I am kind of urgent to get this upstairs sealed up before the real weather starts to come. So here's the riddle. Poor people have it, rich people need it, and if you eat it, you'll die. Think about that. Stay tuned, I'll give you the answer here down the road. It's a busy neighborhood. Sirens. It's a firehouse about 2 blocks away, so we get a lot of little sirens and whistles around here. And I'll go ahead. So we're talking about thermal envelopes today. There's a few things that go into that. First, you have to think about the entire enclosure. You've got 3 main parts: your floor systems, your roof systems, and your walls. Now, that's your barrier. Now you want to try to keep the air, the water, the bugs, the varmints, everything out of your house. Keep it nice. You also want to keep your climate inside completely separated from that. There's a few obvious things that we need to do to help us solve this problem. There's insulation. Insulation is very key, but that's not the whole solution. In this house that I'm working on, it's a very old house. It's over 100 years old. A lot of these technologies didn't exist back then. They did the best with what they could do. And then along came mid-century, late 60s, late 70s. A lot of blown-in insulation became the solution. You blow that stuff in, fill in the cavities. It's a lot better than having nothing. And that's a lot of what I had to deal with downstairs. Upstairs, it was still in its original state. There was absolutely no insulation in this upstairs when I opened it up. And so what I've had to do is add insulation. Now I've got a problem, and most of these old houses have a problem too, and that is there is not enough depth in the roof structure. These are only 2x4s creating my rafters. That's the way they framed it. They're nice, solid 2x4. Structurally, they're incredibly strong. We've got this old house with a lot of spindly frames that are really far spaced apart. My rafters are 24 on center instead of 16. My wall studs are all over the map. I mean, these end gables, it's like they didn't measure. I mean, sometimes they're 22 inches, sometimes they're 24 inches on center, sometimes they're 18 inches on center. So my insulation, there really isn't a standard size that I can use to fit into that. So I'm having to kind of work with that and piecemeal it in. That said, what we've got to do is figure out a way to keep the air out and keep our nice air, conditioned air, in. So walls, roof, and floor are key to that. Now my floor structure, here I'm on the second floor. This floor structure I'm not too worried about. It is fortunately insulated. They had put blown in insulation in this floor system. So I've got some thermal separation. It was really handy back when this wasn't insulated up here. It got cold up here. It was a cold attic. And that kept a lot of that cold air out of the main living floor down below. We're remodeling this attic now and creating livable space up here. Quite a bit of it, about 600-700 square feet or so. Well, maybe about 500 square feet. But we've got a lot of insulation to put into this space up here. I'm not super insulating this house. That's a whole nother thing, and it's cost prohibitive for this project. Now, the ideal way to deal with these 4-inch rafters is to use a spray foam. You just spray the whole thing, it becomes airtight, seals up every crack and crevice in the structure. They shave it off at the face of the stud, and you've got a perfect insulation barrier, airtight seal, and really, that system is really, really good. And if I were stripping this thing down to actual bare stud, that's probably the way to go. And if I had a larger budget, but I don't. So we're gonna go a little bit more old school and do this bad insulation. Now, with that spray foam insulation, I mean, that's something you really can't do it yourself. The equipment to do that is incredibly expensive. And to hire it out, it gets pretty pricey too. If you're looking at a 30-year return on your investment, or if you've got a rental property and you're going to be paying the heat bills, it might be worth it. But in the long run, I don't know. It really depends on your own situation. For me, I'm looking to try to get as good a thermal barrier as I can within our budget. Deepest insulation I can get is an R13 rating. Now, a lot of codes won't allow you to do that low a level. And since this is a project that I'm living in, I don't really have a building code overseeing my work. I don't have any inspections. I didn't have to pull a building permit. So I can kind of do what I want. And if you're doing your own home, you can kind of do what you want. But that said, I still really want to get a lot of thermal value out of what I can do here. Now, I believe this roof has 2 layers of shingles on it at least. I've got behind this some clapboard, and that's what they used to basically stiffen the rafters and provide the surface then to attach the roof to. The R13 does not completely fill up the cavity. There is maybe about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch airspace behind this insulation. And so having that airspace, it gives kind of a transition space between the different thermal conditions that you're trying to create this barrier between. The reason I went with craft base everywhere is that this craft paper acts also as a vapor barrier. This vapor barrier is also key. Now I haven't taped it, but you can tape it. That'll give you a little bit more seal to it. I'm just not going to go to the expense of that. I did try to overlap it and try to get as tight of a closure as I could, but once I screw the drywall up to that, it's pretty much going to seal up. My next layer is the drywall. The thicker the drywall, the better the rating. Now you're not going to get a huge R rating out of drywall or your finished surface, but you will get some. So you have to consider this R13 is not the whole story. You take this, the airspace, the outside wood deck, the drywall itself, all of that combined, you're getting a pretty good rating. And I've really only got this section of roof that is at that rating. As we go up and over to the ceiling, I'm able to squeeze an R19 into that. Now an R19 is actually made for a 2x6, and that's what I have. I've got about a 2x6, 2x8, somewhere in there. They're actually 2x8s that are tapered to about 2x6 on the ends. I've got a decent joist depth to be able to recess that R19 up into there. So I'm getting a little bit more thermal protection on the ceiling, and on top of that, I've got a full attic up there. I only have one condition where I have plumbing up here, and that's in this bathroom adjacent. And I do plan to insulate behind the pipes and create a chase area, and that's what part of the reason I brought the walls out for the tub and the sink. And I'll be able to get that plumbing in between the framing and the insulation itself. Now, if you haven't already done so, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. I'm tracking the progress of this whole build, and along the way, providing how-to episodes as well as just showing the progress as we go. I also invite you to leave a comment down below and let us know how we're doing. Or maybe even just pose a question. I'll do my best to try to get back to you and provide you an answer. Now for the walls, we've got a kind of a different condition. In this house I'm working on, the downstairs and the upstairs are a little bit different. So in the downstairs, as I pulled the plaster away, I found that I've got 2x4 studs at 16 inches on center, but then I've got what's called a car siding. Now car siding is something we're reintroducing as an interior finish here. Some people call it shiplap. It's kind of the same type of thing. But basically it's an interlocking plank, and the stuff downstairs is, I think, pushing 7/8 inch thick, at least 3/4. So they were nice, thick, heavy hardwood boards that they've used down there. And the whole house is clad in this. This is what gives the house its shear rigidity, or the ability to resist twist and lateral movement. So you think about it this way, if you build a whole bunch of sticks on a wall and you put a bunch of weight on top of it and you push it sideways, all those sticks could just kind of topple over like dominoes. So it's the plywood sheeting in modern construction or this car siding that provides that rigidity. If you pull all that car siding off of a house, you're going to lose a lot of your structural integrity, and it needs to be replaced with new plywood. So with that car siding in place downstairs, combined with the studs, and then on top of that car siding is the actual wood siding. That's got a little bit of about 1/4 inch thick. And then on top of that, I've got the vinyl. There's air spaces between the vinyl and the siding, so that's helping me a little bit. It's on the very outside edge, so there's not a whole lot of thermal protection there. But we are looking at multiple layers of resistance. So the vinyl and the siding behind it should provide a good weather protection system, and that's why I left the siding in place. Ideally, if you're looking to try to do something perfect, you tear all that off right down to the bare stud, and you re-sheet it with plywood, and then you put your building wrap on there, your new finish system on the outside, and continue on with the inside insulation, probably a foam insulation, and then go ahead with your finished materials on the inside. I'm not going to all that expense with this house, so we're looking to try to just do what we can to try to get as much thermal barrier as we can in those downstairs walls. So by adding the insulation, providing a little bit of airspace between that car siding on the outside and the actual back of the batt insulation, there's a good amount of R rating. I used R13 downstairs. It's only 2x4, And so I want that airspace. I don't want to fill that whole cavity. I don't want to buy R19 thinking, oh, that's going to be better. And I'm just going to push it in there, squish it in, and get it flat and push it back. It removes the airspace, compresses the insulation, and basically turns it into an R13 anyway. So there's no point in going to the expense of getting R30 insulation and shoving it into a 2x4 space. You just compress it. The insulation only works when it's fluffy and it's got air inside the fiberglass. So don't over insulate in that sense. Now, I've got that bad insulation in there, used the craft face, overlapped it, and then I went ahead and put a plastic vapor barrier on top of that. I went that route downstairs on the exterior walls. I do want vapor barrier on the exterior walls as much as I can. You're not going to get actual water coming through the wall. It's moisture that can condensate on the warm side of that wall, on the back side of your drywall. You don't want that. That's what makes mold. So we go ahead and put that vapor barrier in to keep that moisture off the back of the drywall to keep it from rotting. Now up here, I have a weaker system. There is no car siding on the second level on these gable ends. There's only 3 gable ends. There's one here, and one over there where I'm putting in that new window. Now those 3 walls are basically siding tacked to the studs. There wasn't any need to provide structural car siding on those frames. Well, that siding is falling apart. It's pretty much wore out. I think it's cedar. It's just not in that good a shape anymore. So I've got to figure out a way to try to improve my envelope on these gable ends. And the way I'm approaching that is we have to assume that siding's not even there. So I'm going to go ahead and fill that cavity up as much as I can with an R19, and I'll get the full protection of that. It's going to compress a little bit, so I won't get a full 19 rating, but an airspace really isn't relevant there because I don't have any outside barrier to trap the air in. So that said, I put the insulation in and then siding on the outside. Well, it's not very airtight. So that cold wind coming out of the southwest is just going to push through that vinyl siding. That vinyl siding's not wind resistant. I mean, it's going to hold up, it's going to keep some of it, and some of the wind will come out, but it's going to work through there, as well as probably bugs. We don't want hornets' nests in the house. So on the upper level, I am going to go ahead and use a building wrap. The building wrap is going to provide a breathable surface that it won't let moisture trap behind it. So we don't want to put plastic on the outside. We don't want moisture to get into the wall and not have a way to get out. That's going to make it rot. So we put a building wrap material on the outside that prevents water that gets behind the siding from getting in and rotting my insulation out. Having that building paper on that part is very key. I didn't put it on the downstairs, on the first level. I just didn't think it was necessary. I just didn't feel that I had a whole lot of air infiltration that's going to penetrate through. So that building paper on the upstairs is very key because I don't have a lot of barrier. So you're really waiting on this real answer, aren't you? It's coming. I promise. Keep guessing. So, unless you're going to have basically a box without any windows, it's really nice to have some sunlight, so long as it's not letting the cold through there. That's why low emissivity, low E glazing, and dual glazing is a key component to keeping that thermal barrier intact. The original windows in this house were all single pane. I threw those out. Don't need them. We've got all new windows in this house. These are the cheapest windows I could get, and they'll do fine for what we're trying to do. We're not trying to super insulate this house. We're just trying to keep the cold out and make sure our energy bills are as low as they possibly can on an economical budget. Now these windows, there's a few things you need to know about putting these in. You've got to flash them. You've got to flash them appropriately and make sure the water doesn't get in. And as you flash it, that's going to help seal the joints that it's set against. Once that window's in, you need to set it in caulk, make sure it's fully sealed. And then after I've set it in caulk and nailed it on, I then flash that edge to create a second line of defense against weather as well as air. So I'm not going to get air leakage coming in from the side of the windows. The last line of defense is to stuff these window cracks as best you can with either a low expansion foam or just some scraps of bad insulation. Either one is fine. You're just trying to close that gap so that once the trim is put in place, you won't even know it's there and you won't get air leaking around your windows and have a drafty window. Now doors, they come along the lines of windows. They need to be installed properly. I don't have any doors to worry about up in the upper level, but downstairs I do have 2 doors that go to the outside, the front door and the back door. Now, some building codes may require an actual air pressure test. And what they do in that is they're going to come in before you start drywall, and they're going to basically put a fan in the front door, and they're going to turn that fan on and start sucking air out of the house. And they're going to try to see if that negative air pressure is going to pull any air in through the walls or the ceiling or the roof or the foundation or wherever. Now, I don't have to do that, and it's kind of an expensive test too. If you're really worried about it, go ahead, do one. But in this old house, I'm not too worried about it. I just want to keep the snow and the bugs out. Well, we've talked quite a bit about all the parts that go into this, but it's really the entire system is what you're trying to build. The building wrap combined with the insulation, combined with vapor barriers, the thick materials such as my car siding or the drywall inside, all of that works together in unison to create your thermal envelope. The more lines of defense you have from the weather and the air, the better. In this upstairs, I've probably invested maybe $1,000, $1,500 in my thermal system. It's not that much. I'll see the return on that within probably 2 years. And to boot, I think you get a tax break on all this. So if you spend money on insulation, you get to write it off. So the riddle, if poor people have it and rich people need it, and you eat it, you'll die. Did you guess right? The answer? Absolutely nothing. Clever one, isn't it? Hopefully this gives you kind of a rundown on all that's involved in making sure your home is protected against that harsh climate outside, and make sure your interior is nice and cozy. Whether it's hot or cold outside, it makes a big difference to have a good thermal envelope implemented. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you got something out of this. It's not like my typical videos, but this is a really important topic, and it's not one that you really just kind of know. Something I learned through my days as an architect, and hopefully it helps you out. Now I gotta get this window in, fix this dumb hole. But I hope you come back. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. We'll see you next time. The other cool thing about building wrap, makes your house look like something's going on. Kind of like it's getting somewhere.